So now we determined that the pressure test is successful. Now what? Alright, well, you have to dismantle the thing again and then start actually rebuilding it. So we got to take the exhaust off, the intake, everything. It's all got to come off. This intake boot is really not as bad as I thought it was, so maybe we'll keep that, because it definitely doesn't leak. There's no issue there. Put a little bit of sealant on it, will be good. Let's get rid of the MIDI vac for now. We don't need that. Take off the exhaust here. Alright, so after we've done the pressure test, we've got it back down to here. What do we do next? Let's find out. So I'm going to try to keep rebuilding this more or less in the order that I took it apart. And yes, I am cheating. I am looking at my video of how I did it, because otherwise I would have no hope of putting this back together. So some of these parts are old and kind of old. So some of them I will attempt to replace. So this is an AV mount. New AV mount. $20mm. For these type of things, you really do need a cone wrench. But I don't have a cone wrench. Let's put the cap back. So here's the trick to getting this flippy cap thing right. Don't try to stick the ball in this way and try to pull up. Doesn't work. Stick the thread in first. Yeah. And then up and in. Now you got it. Simple. Easy. Click down. There's your flippy cap installed. I'm wondering if putting this thing together is kind of similar to the other saws, and again I like to divide and conquer. So this stuff and then that stuff, and that way it all kind of makes sense. Let's see if that actually works pretty good. I've got this ignition coil cleaned off here. You have to get it through the rubber grommet next to the shorting wire. Yep, and it goes. Okay, that goes. That's good. And what's the orientation here? Like that. Ha! Good. So that goes down, I think, like that. And then we need the two bolts that hold it on. And hopefully you can be more organized than me with these screws and whatnot. The more magnetic trays you have, the better. You don't want to tighten these down, you just want to put them in loosey-goosey for now until you get the flywheel in there. So this can move. You want this to move. Hopefully this black wire goes here. top. Don't remember exactly how this routes, so we'll get that figured later. I think we can just put the flywheel down. I think that actually makes sense. So let's consider that. Keep in mind how the wires are oriented and how they run. That way you don't get confused later, like me. An important piece of the flywheel is the key. You want this surface to be as clean as possible because you do want the tapers to jam fit. Now the crank is hardened steel, but the flywheel is soft, so it will crush and jam effectively. So there's your flywheel. And it rotates just fine. Let's get our card from HL Supply here. Get it on the magnet. And then you can crank her down. Flywheel nut. Now, one thing I do on my other saws, and for this won't matter, but you can grind in the crank itself a line just to make and draw a line on the flywheel. That way you know that you never have slip timing. On this one, I don't think I'm going to worry about it, but on the bigger saws that have the capacity to shear that stupid flywheel key, this is unlikely to shear the flywheel key, but if you have the possibility of shearing a flywheel key, then you probably want to grind on the crank and then draw a line with a Sharpie on the flywheel to show where the orientation is. There probably is a specific spec for this. I don't have it. I'm going to use 13 foot-pounds on this. Do need a piston stop. My piston stop, I'm going to use my torque wrench on the flywheel nut. That's it. Back it off a little bit, pull the piston stop out. It sure looks like I've done something wrong with my wiring, because this black wire here looks like it's going to rub the flywheel fairly significantly, and that's bad. I know what I missed. Over here is a little catch for this wire. So we've got the flywheel down now, but let's remove the ignition coil or pull it out and then see exactly how this routes. Okay, I actually took the ignition coil back out and rewired it in there. The small black wire goes underneath the ignition coil wire, and you want to make sure that it's really well seated so that the flywheel doesn't run into it, of course. Again, with the business card, make sure the magnet lines up. Loctite. Black wire attached. You can pull this over here taut, that's fine. Move the flywheel off. Good. Now it's not going to rub, not going to interfere. So this side's good. Now let's go over to this side. I had a rubber thing. Yeah, this rubber thing. This rubber piece went on here. Grease on here to get it easier. In there, that's good. While you're working, probably not a bad idea to put the spark plug in. Don't have to tighten it, just want it in there. So now I figure we can work on this a little bit. So let's see if the oiler goes down. The oiler is all cleaned up. You want to make sure this spins free. So the oiler goes down probably in this orientation. Let's hook up the oil line. Don't know whether that's a good idea to do first or last or whatever. Maybe last. Well, it seems to be alright. Looks like this rubber piece goes in about that way. And sits there. Good. That seems to sit nicely like that. 2 small screws on the oiler. Loctite again. While this thing's hanging out, let's add that back. Put the rubber piece on here. Pull this through. Now these things are sharp, so you do have to be careful. So I use a pair of pliers to help me push this through the rubber and to get it to go straight through, because you definitely want it to go through in the orientation that actually grabs the wire. It's got to contact copper. If it doesn't, you're not going to have ignition. Once you have that, you can bring that back through like that. Now you have your wire back there. At this point, let's put the exhaust on. I don't know for sure if you can put the case around with the exhaust on or not. I think so. So let's try it like this. Red Loctite on the exhaust bolts. Metal gasket here. Two exhaust bolts with washers. One. Two. Line it up. Little Loctite 518 just to get it to stick a little bit. Get one started, get the other started. 1, 2, double check. 1, 2 exhaust bolts. Let's put the dog back on. But I noticed that there's a piece here, it looks like it might be broken. So let's see if we happen to have new. So in this case, the chain catcher actually goes on top of the dog. Dog goes down first like that, then the chain catcher on top, I think. Makes more sense. One. Two. Double check. 1, 2. Dog's back on. Nice new chain catcher. Before we get to the gas tank, I did notice that the intake boot was on here with that plastic ring, and that was okay. So I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on the intake boot here. Don't have to. Generally I'd replace this, but it was holding pressure just fine when we did the pressure test. So no need to replace it then. Plastic piece goes on. I am not confident that there is not an orientation here, so pay attention to that as you're taking this apart. Down snug is good. Maybe now we can turn our attention to the gas tank. Long and short of that is it looks like it will go minus this. So delete all of this part. Let's put the gas tank on. Looks like you need to remove the exhaust in order to get the gas tank on. See if it goes now. Perfectly. Okay. Small screw there. The gas tank goes down with 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the gas tank is on. Let's see if we can put the exhaust on. It would have been a whole lot easier to do this with this off. I mean, I don't know how I'm actually going to get this on with the gasket there. So I stuck the gasket on there with some Loctite just to stick it. And luckily it looks like it's holding, but otherwise I can't imagine that this would go well. And of course Loctite, red Loctite on the bolts. We can look from this angle and make sure the gasket's still there. Yep. Didn't go anywhere. Let's do the intake. Now looking at this, I think the impulse hose line comes up through here. And we want to put the intake on the intake boot. Get some Loctite 515. Or 518. The intake boot goes down. Then the square piece, which is the retaining ring. Easy. I wonder, can we put the starter cover on at this point? Okay. One, two, three, four, and then down by hand. Seems like it pulls over fine. In hindsight here, it really looks like that spark plug line went underneath the oiler, like it held it down. So hot tip, put the oiler down after you put the ignition coil wire down. That looks a little closer to how it should go, huh? Don't know why they would tuck that under there, but that's apparently what they did. One, two to hold the oiler back down. So really best to do the flywheel side stuff first and then come over and do this oiler, clutch, and all that stuff. Makes pretty good sense, I think. Let's see if this goes down now. Yeah, that sits down nicely. And this sits in here. Just fine. Short bolts for these. And since I think I stole these, which are short, makes more sense to have long bolts here. Yeah, so I think it's 3 short bolts here. Check them by hand, just on holding plastic down, so you don't want to really torque these huge. Starting to come together and look like a saw. Bumper. Bumper. Oiler pinion. Goes right down. Good. New needle bearing. Clutch drum. Make sure that's on there good. And then the clutch goes on. Okay. Again, finally starting to look like a saw.